Namaskar. Hello and welcome to P Guru's channel. I'm your host Riyar. Joining me is Mohan Sonti, and we are going to be talking about the trade imbalance, how Trump is trying to balance the trade. Does this work in practice? And what does the data point to? A lot of stuff. This is going to be data filled, and I request all of you to like this video. Mohanji has spent a lot of time putting together the research, and we are going to present you with a dazzling information of data. Let's welcome Mohanji. Mohanji, namaskar and welcome to P Guru's channel. How are you, sir?
Namaste, Sriji, and namaste to all the viewers. So this is about trying to understand what is happening currently regarding the trade between the USA and Bharat. The idea of the deficit, the trade, the tariffs, all the things, we'll see the actual numbers. So we'll put all the rhetoric aside and all the emotions aside, we can actually see the numbers. So the objective is for people to understand exactly what's happening.
Thank you so much. With your permission, now I'll load the deck and then you can take it away from here.
All right. So I have the first slide is as usual, it's all the sources, and you can see the ones in the blue or the maroon, the blue color are all the government sources, and the one in the orange are all the other sources, but these are all the primary sources. I have cross-checked and verified with many other sources. So all the data is correct and they all, literally talk to each other. Everything is good about that. And please do, I request people to just follow through these government websites. They have beautiful data. I think all the governments have done a wonderful job. And I really appreciate that. The Indian government, the Press Information Bureau, the US government, European government, I think we have got excellent data. So you can always go back to the slide to look at the sources. So let's get to the topic. It's about understanding the deficit, the trade, and the tariffs. I'm going to cover this in 5 segments. One is the trade deficit causes. Then there's a trade deficit, the history of it, and how did this whole thing actually start? And when did it start? When did US start having the deficit? The first one is going to be about the causes and why they have this kind of a deficit, lessons that all the other countries can learn. And third is going to be about the trade between China and Europe, US trade. And the fourth is going to be between the trade with Bharat, also known as India. And the fifth segment is going to be the US-Bharat-Russia relation. All right, so we're going to cover these 5 segments. So the first thing we need to understand is regarding the trade imbalance. So a balanced trade between 2 countries with vastly different population, economy size, and natural resources, etc. That would just be a metastable condition. I mean, that simply cannot be achieved. And if it is done, that's going to be a metastable condition that is not going to last long. So only a summation of all the trades across nations can theoretically be balanced. So it's basically balancing your own budget, but you cannot do that individually with every single country. Yes, Sriji.
What is metastable condition? What does that mean? Can you unpack that for us? Just like in reality, what happens?
Yes, it's something like, imagine there is a little dome and you put a little ball on the top. You move a little bit, it will fall on either side. That is metastable, right? If you have a little ball and you put a ball inside it, it's stable. It always goes to the center. But if you put it over a dome, then it's going to slide on one side or the other. That is a metastable condition. Meaning this is something that has to be balanced very carefully. For example, you have 50 states in USA or in any number of states in Bharat or other places, right? It is practically not possible for all the states to have a perfect balanced trade between each other. So, but in a summation of all the states put together, there's going to be a balance. Everyone is going to balance their budgets, and overall there's going to be a balance. So it's the same with the nations. So you cannot have 2 countries, a country with a population of 1.5 billion people and a country with only 300 million people. We cannot have a precise trade balance. And also they are of different sizes in economy. They have different natural resources. Different places produce different things. The same thing happens in USA as well, right? Texas produces oil and Michigan produces cars. So there cannot be an exact balance for everything. But overall, there can be a balance. So summation of all the trades. So that is the basic idea. But said that, we'll get to the actual point on what is a trade deficit? What is it that's causing the trade deficit? The main reason for that is actually an American culture. So I know Trump has said many times that the whole world is an unfair place and Americans are the only fair people and the rest of the world is taking advantage of America. I mean, it is nice. I mean, from a political standpoint, all the Americans want to feel that we are the nicest people and the rest of the world is evil. But that's okay. Other than that, that is not the fact. The truth is that the deficit, the cause for that lies in the American culture. Because in American culture, if you take it all the way to an individual, they spend a lot more than they earn. In fact, the idea of the credit card culture, wherein they borrow from tomorrow and spend it today. So they lead a better life today and they have to catch up with tomorrow. And this continues forever, right?
Tomorrow never comes.
Yes, and so the idea is they have a very low savings. We're going to see the data and statistics for each one of them, and these were actually collected by the government. So even they are aware of it. So they have an extremely low savings, and it's a very common phrase in America to say that people live from paycheck to paycheck, right? Now, the same thing that you see an individual, when you put it across the country also behaves in a similar way, wherein they consume more than they produce, and that is the cause of the deficit. The question is, why would they consume more than they produce? Because they borrow it, and people have a higher standard of living than what they produce. So Americans in general have a higher standard of living than what they produce, but for many other countries, they have a slightly lower standard of living, or just about, compared to what they produce. So let's put this into some numbers here. USA has about 4% of the world's population, and it has about 26% of the GDP. That's in nominal terms, and 15% by the purchasing power parity. In reality, the nominal and the purchasing power parity can be manipulated and can be turned around a little bit. There's a lot of subjectivity involved in the purchasing power parity, and GDP for the nominal also has its own manipulative mechanisms on how it can be made better or lower, because inflation is often accounted for into the GDP, right? So things like that. There are ways of manipulating, but on the whole, it produces somewhere between, the truth is between 15 and 26% is what America produces for a 4% population. But there's a lot of data that shows that the natural resources consumed by America is about 25%, which means it is consuming a little higher than what it is producing. Therefore, it is going to have a deficit. Now we go back to the American culture part with the spending more than earning. See, if you think about it, is it a bad idea? From corporate standpoint, it's a great idea, because when you borrow from the future, then you're always on your toes. Then you're going to be working every single day because you want to catch up from tomorrow. But said that, it actually destroys the families, it destroys the culture, it destroys many other things. That's a lesson, something that other countries need to learn. But let's look at some stats for this. So the personal savings rate, and this comes from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, US Department of Commerce. This numbers are from 2010 to 2024. You can see that only the American saving is about 5% of what they earn of the total income. And in fact, in the last 22, 23, you see it's even less than 5%. So essentially, whatever, for every $100 they earn, they save less than $5. Everything else is spent, right? There is an aberration in around 2020. This is during the COVID time. But we don't have to go into the details of why that happened. We know that that is a statistical anomaly, and we can ignore that for now. All right, but in general, the savings 2010 to 2024, you see, is under 5%. They don't save much. We'll see the same statistics from other sources as well, and all of these are also coming from the similar location from the government data. So you see that average person savings from 1959 to 2025, you would see that in the past, they used to save about 11%, and in some instances, almost 12, 13, or 15%, all the way to 1970s. And then it started declining quite rapidly. So something changed in 70s, and by late 70s, it kind of matured, and by 80s, you can see that the savings has dramatically come down. And that is the cultural change, and we're going to see that later and what that change actually is. Again, the graph on the right side shows the similar numbers from 1960 to 2023. And as you can see, bar the 2020 statistical anomaly, their savings are very, very low, under 5%, right? Now we go to, when somebody lives this way, what happens is you're going to have a high level of bankruptcies, and USA has one of the highest levels of bankruptcies. So currently, for the last 5 years, we have about 500,000 bankruptcies per year, individual bankruptcies, and not talking about the business, just the non-business individuals. But just 20 years ago, America had almost 1.5 to 2 million bankruptcies per year. For a population of 250 to 300 million, that is about 75 million households, and then about 10% is categorized as below poverty line, meaning they are dependent on the government for many things, and therefore they never go bankrupt. So for a smaller population, for about 60 million families, having 1.5 to 2 million bankruptcies per year is substantial, and this is one of the highest in the world. All right, so you can see that living from paycheck to paycheck, obviously some people will fall off the edge and they file for bankruptcies. It's extremely high in US. So as a culture, you would see that US also follows on the similar theme where they keep borrowing to lead a better life today. All right, and that's the reason it'll always permanently have a deficit. What needs to be changed is not tariffs. I mean, it's like somebody who is addicted to gambling, just increasing the pay is not going to meet their demands. The demands just go up proportionately, and you can never catch up.
They
What needs
gamble more.
Yes, because you need to change their culture and attitude. If that is not changed, then we are going into a spiraling loop, right? You just give more money, they'll gamble more, something like that. All right. Then we'll see the history of the deficit on how the American policies, now that you know what the culture is, so the policies are kind of shaped based on that. Now, they will say the issue is with all the tariffs, and some countries are putting a lot of tariffs. I know Trump has used the word tariff all along. But again, like I said, that is not the reality. The reality is actually the American culture of borrowing from tomorrow and leading a better life today. But said that, even for the tariffs, there is something called as a GATT agreement, right? GATT is a general agreement on tariffs and trade that was in place since 1947. And Bharat was part of it since 1948. And China was never part of it. This GATT eventually evolved into a WTO, or the World Trade Organization, in 1995. And China was still not part of it. And the total number of members in GATT were about 128, which means a substantial number of countries were part of the GATT, right? So it is not about a bad tariffs and bad trade and none of those things, because all these countries were complying to the GATT. And later, the WTO currently has 166 members. So which means the rules are the same for all the countries. Then why would USA alone have a very high deficit, and why do they keep building it? That American culture. That American culture led to the American policies. Now, why did this happen? We'll see that 1970s in USA is called the me decade. So me decade because all the baby boomers, right? This is the time. The me decade is, like many psychologists call that as, it's a culture of individualism, self-absorption, and narcissism, meaning many of them have become reckless and they all are about themselves. And this is one of the phenomena that has been observed in 1970s, which often is dubbed as the me decade. All right, which means these baby boomers suddenly, as you have seen in the previous graph, come 70s, the savings started dropping down, which means they have become a lot more self-indulgent, right? And which means that's where the credit card companies, all of them come in and they'll give you that your tomorrow, and so you can live today. And they kept borrowing. This same culture, you will see that in 1970s, Richard Nixon, he went to China and had the Shanghai Communique, right? This was in 1972. You have to remember that they will say it is mostly geopolitical, but there is geopolitical angle to it where they wanted China to be a counterweight to Russia. But this deal was actually economic. They actually made a deal that is almost, you'll see the graph later on how it was almost entirely economics and how it is about the trade. They wanted to strengthen China or whatever be the case, right? But they actually established a trade communication with a trade contact with China. Remember that China is not part of the GATT, so they didn't have any tariff trade. I mean, none of those rules apply to them. So it is America that actually put an extra effort. And if you guys remember, in 1971, we had an Indo-Pakistan war. In fact, America was very desperate to actually make this deal with China, to the point that in 1971 war, Americans actually threatened to nuke Bharat. Despite the fact that Pakistan is a known terrorist military state and has always been, and it's been a rogue state, and at that time it was proactively killing millions of Bangladeshis. Yet, America would forgive everything, and their focus was actually getting a trade deal with China, which is not even part of the GATT. which means none of those rules apply to China. It's a one-to-one deal that America made. This later culminated, that is also called the ping pong diplomacy. Then in 1979 came Jimmy Carter, who finalized this whole China deal and granted it the most favored nation. And in fact, that is the time it basically said that I have nothing to do with, they had the one China policy agreement and all of that. And China made a whole list of, you have to read through the Carter-China deal. It is online. It's one of the sources I mentioned. The deal looks like China basically gave a long list of rules on what needs to be done. And America just said, yes, sure, which includes things like the America cannot have a two-China policy, and it cannot work for the independence of Taiwan. It has to recognize Taiwan to be part of China, and so many other things. And they agreed to all of those things just to have a trade deal with China. So it is not entirely geopolitical. The relation with Pakistan is geopolitical. They have no trade there. But with China, it was also trade. Then in 2001, China entered the WTO. Now you'll see the graphs that reflect these things, right? So you see this is as a percentage of the GDP, the gray line is the goods and services balance. You see that starting in 1960s, they were in surplus. Come 1970s, the me decade starts in 1970. And you see a little bit of a fluctuation from 70 to 75, 80 or so. But somewhere around 80s, you'll see that the deficit starts and it keeps on growing. This is the time the me decade has matured and American policy. They started having a trade deal with China, which is not even part of the GATT. And it was not part of WTO either until 2001. You're going to see the similar graph, and you can see the gray line just going down and down, right? So that is a deficit. It kept on increasing. This is not a problem that happened in the last 5, 10, 15 years. This has been there since 1980, when they made a deal with China in late 1970s, which means it's been around for almost 35 or 45 years. All right. But they make it look like as if the world has taken advantage in the last few years. It isn't. That is not the truth. Now we'll see another graph. You see this is from 1980 till 2020. You can see the dark black line, that is your total trade deficit. In 1980s, this is in dollar amounts. The previous one was a percentage of GDP. You can see it is very little in 1980s, and you can see that's a constant line that is going down, right? All the way it increased to about $1 trillion. This is again starting in 1980s. Remember the deal with the China and the cultural thing. All of them together, you can see that it's a constant line, and it's a phenomena for the last 45 years. That's almost half a century. So nobody's taking advantage for half a century. All right. This is something that Americans themselves, it's their culture that they would borrow it and spend it today. Anyway, so the next one is about the trade of America between China and Europe. The China deficit started in 1985. They had a $6 million deficit in their trade. In 1985, in 86, it bumped up to $1.7 billion. This comes from the census.gov. All these details are given in the government website, US government website. This is the data they have. And in 1995, you see in just 10 years, it went from 1.7 to $35 billion. That's the kind of a trade deal that they had with China. And remember, it's still not part of, it was never part of the GATT, and China is still not part of the WTO by then. In 2001, because America urged them to become part of the WTO, and they are the ones who agreed to it, and they brought China into the WTO fold. All right, their trade deficit was 83 billion. And just in 5 years after that, it bumped up to $202 billion. And in 2015, it was $367 billion. Now in 2024, it came back to 295 billion. Now you see, it's funny that it went from 367 to 295. We talked about how the GDP and purchasing power parity, all those numbers are a little subjective, and some of those numbers can be tampered with. Same goes with what is a deficit. Now, it sounds like everything is fair and straightforward when I say 367 billion or 2024, 295 billion. It is not so, because what China believes is the deficit is different from what America believes is the deficit. So that adds a new layer to the whole confusion, right? Now, we'll also see the Europe deficit numbers. In 97, they had 17 billion. All the way to 2024, they went to 236 billion, which is just about, give or take, the same as China, right? But that doesn't end there. The China's 295 billion deficit, basically the trade that's happening with China, it is utilized for the growth of their country, as well as they have to defend themselves, which means they're going to invest a substantial amount in their military and other things, right? Not so for Europe. So the 236 billion is actually kind of an illusion. That is actually a smaller number than the reality. You have to remember that Europe doesn't spend much on their defense. Essentially, this entire amount is used for their own growth and development or whatever else that they want to do with that money. In fact, on American taxpayers' money, that our military actually goes there and puts a security blanket every night over Europe and sings a lullaby and puts them to sleep. That's what America does, which is a substantial amount of money. The only person to have called that out is Trump, right? But until this point, they were all okay with it. And we have to remember these kind of trade agreements and deals, all of them are definitely biased and lopsided when it comes to Europe. There are many reasons. Basically, the people here haven't forgotten their grandma's house. Even though it's been 8 generations since independence and 15 generations since the Europeans have arrived in USA, they always have a close contact and affiliation to their grandma's house in Europe. They always know that's where they came from, and all the deals are kind of favorable to them. And that's one of the reasons why this 236 billion is not exactly same as the 295 is not necessarily a larger number for China, but 236 billion actually has a substantial military blanket that American taxpayers' money that America goes, puts it over the Europeans, sings a lullaby at night. All right. Now we'll see some of these in the graphs. The US trade with China in millions of dollars. You see in 1985, we saw the number 6 million, but it started growing up, right? And in 2001, China joined the WTO, and you can see how it started dramatically increasing. So it has nothing to do with the governments, right? Clinton government, Bush government, then Obama, Trump, all the way it has been increasing. Except during Trump time, it seems to have come down. If you remember in 2018, there was some sort of a tariff war. There was a trade war with China, right? And then it started stabilizing again. And during Biden era, the only issue being we had a COVID and multiple other things happened. So some of the data around the 2020 and 21 is not going to be exact. Now, this graph that you see just dipped between 2018 and 2020. The net trade has come down, right? Because of the trade war that it had with China. But did Trump actually gain a victory? We'll see that in the next graph. Remember I mentioned about the perception of the imports and exports, that what USA has and what China has is different. Many a times it so happens, there are many reasons for it. Some reasons are basically to avoid the tariffs, to avoid the taxes and many other things. That China sometimes reports, like in this case, it said in 2010, it says it has exported about $220 billion worth of goods. But America reports that it has imported close to 300 billion. So there is almost 100 billion difference, and you see the difference.
How does this discrepancy come about?
So yeah, one reason is basically to avoid the tariffs. Sometimes they just bring it in and they won't report it as they have given it. Or sometimes in Chinese side, because they impose taxes, it's almost like a kind of a smuggling, even though I don't know if I can use the word smuggling, but something to that effect, because they essentially bring in the goods without reporting it to the government, or they over-report it. So depending on how the taxation and the tariff benefits works. So the government website, I think it's in the congress.gov is where I got this one from. Even though it is in the US Census and China Customs, but this entire graph is in the congress.gov. And the description they gave in that is, they gave 2 reasons. I doubt if they can give any more reasons than that, but those 2 reasons are just essentially saying that somebody is trying to avoid the tariffs or the taxes on either side. And therefore, you see the discrepancy. But in either case, I think 100 billion is substantial, and they always had this. Now, interestingly, you see that, look at this graph carefully around 2020s. Remember 2018, there was a trade war. And so the total trade reduced. But you see the blue line, what USA is reporting is the one that is coming closer and closer and matching up with what China is reporting. The Chinese graph doesn't see a much variation. It's the US graph that has actually taken the twists and turns to match up with it. You'll see that better in the next one for the deficit. In this graph is for the deficit, what China believes is the deficit and what US reports it as the deficit. China says there is a 175 billion. 2010 it says $175 billion deficit, whereas USA says it's 275. So there's $100 billion difference, and this continued all the way till 2018 when there was a trade war. Now, the total amount of trade has reduced because of the trade war, but said that, in my opinion, looking at this graph, you see the graph that is the reporting that is done by the USA is the one that went and caught up with what China is reporting. Which means the compromise, in my opinion, looking at this graph, has probably happened from the US side and not from the China side. China essentially stuck to whatever numbers that it came up with, and eventually it's USA that adjusted to those numbers and caught up with it. All right. And you saw the same thing in the previous graph.
Either that or US might have plugged the loopholes, right? It's also possible.
So either USA had all the loopholes and China was perfect, which is also I don't necessarily know if that is the truth. I'm just saying that clearly USA is the one that made all the changes. I'm not saying China was truthful and USA had all the problem. Whatever be the case, USA made all the adjustments and eventually caught up with China. That is what we can see from here. All right. So then you see with the Europe also has, from the imports and exports, it's been having $100 billion deficit, and it's been increasing from 2014. So essentially, Europe also did exactly the same set of things. But again, remember that USA usually uses kid gloves when it comes to Europe, right? So it has an entirely different treatment compared to any other nation. So it is not that China is the only one who took advantage or China is bad. It's that European Union also did exactly the same things to almost the same degree that China has done. All right. Except European Union has a lot more benefits because USA takes care of its military expenditures too. Military has a security blanket on them. All right. Now the US trade with...
let's back up for a second. Go back to the previous slide, please. So this is Europe, including United Kingdom, Western Europe?
This is European Union from 2014.
Oh, EU.
So,
EU.
Yeah, so
is UK part of EU or not?
Britain left EU, I don't remember when, but I don't think Britain is included in this because...
So this is mainland Europe. This is mainland Europe.
Yes.
Okay.
What I have seen in the tables in census.gov is Britain is reported separately. So I think this is only for this is rest of the Europe, Western Europe minus Britain, I think.
Okay. Let's go back. Sorry, go ahead.
And also this is reported in the euros.
Right.
So Britain is probably not in part of this.
That's true.
All right. Now we go with US trade with Bharat, right? So the deficit with India, if you look at it, in 1985, it was $650 million. 95, it was 2.4 billion. 2005 is 11. You see the growth is very stable and steady. And eventually in 2024, it touched 45 billion. In fact, it's been at 23 billion for almost 2015 for 5 years. It actually hasn't changed. And then after the COVID, I think there was a little jump, and then we sustained it. In 2024, it went to 45 billion. To put it into perspective, China had 295 billion deficit. European Union has 236 billion deficit, which means this 45 billion is a paltry amount. So the amount of news that you see and what Trump says, and every day you say something about Bharat all the time, makes me believe that it's nothing to do with the trade or the money at all. The real target is something else, and we don't know what it is, or we can only have few guesses on what that could be. But certainly trade is not one of them, because this amount, 45 billion, compared to the total amount of trade that America does, or Bharat, or China, or any one of them do, this is literally fighting over pennies.
Pennies, peanuts.
peanuts, very small amount. $45 billion is nothing compared to the actual trade that we do. The India's trade to the world, we have exported, and this comes from our own website. It says we have our exports stand at $821 billion and imports at $915 billion. So what does that tell you? In Bharat, we do have about $100 billion deficit as well. It's just that with USA, it is $45 billion surplus, but overall it is $100 billion deficit. See, this is what I was talking about, different the countries with different size and different economy size and the population and things like that. So Bharat does incur $100 billion deficit overall, but 45 billion surplus in one place and deficits in few other places, and eventually they start balancing this out, right? That is how every country does. But for some reason, USA seems to be extremely upset with this teeny amount. And if you look at it, the goods that we have, total number of goods is about 128 billion. That's the total trade that we do, which is 10%, about 10% of the export is 87 billion, which is about 10% of the total trade that Bharat does with the world. So there's only a meager 10%. And it's even teenier fraction when it comes to the total trade that USA does with the rest of the world. So this is insignificant amount. And the imports is 41 billion, which is not even 10%, right? About 5%. The services, actually, we have a balanced trade. We did export of 41.6 and import of 41.8. So the whole dispute is about this delta between the goods export and import. Then we'll go over what are the goods that we actually export, right? And then we'll see that many of these things, it makes absolutely no sense to fight over this patry amount and actually ruin the relationship between two countries. So we have to figure out why they do that. Now, we can see this in the graph from 1999 to 2023. As we see the graph, you see how smooth and stable it is. You do not see the sudden spikes that we saw for the graph for China or even with European Union. But for China, we saw that after they joined WTO, how the graph has changed. It suddenly spikes up. But here it's a very smooth trade and balanced trade for a very long time. Balanced as in not equal, but certainly it's a very gradual increase. And USA is a much larger economy. It's almost, for nominal terms, it's almost 10 times. So there is going to be some sort of an imbalance. And Bharat too has a deficit. We have seen that because we do deal with smaller economies as well, right? And that is the nature of things. So you don't see any issue here. I would say this kind of a graph is the cleanest graph that you can get between two countries. And this is a very small amount. This should have been much better business, but this is a very small amount that we do. But nevertheless, certainly not something that we should have any disputes with, or what America is doing right now. Now we see that the trade, this actually comes again from the, I think it's the congress.gov. We see the goods from 2014 to 2024. The service sector, the same thing that I mentioned before, are very close lines between the exports and imports are very close to each other, which means the balance is close to the zero. Whereas in goods, I think there is a little bit difference, and that mostly comes in the last couple of years. Once again, these are all very small numbers. And trade, I don't think is the issue between what USA has with Bharat. Even though people talk about trade all the time, Trump is repeating that, but I don't think trade is the actual target because these are very small numbers. As you see, it's only 10% of the total exports and imports that we do. And it's even a teenier percent when it comes to US, right? And remember that when it comes to the deficit, Bharat ranks 10th or 11th in the list. So there are 10 other countries which have higher deficit than Bharat. So ours is much smaller. It's not even like, I mean, he keeps repeating that we have very high tariffs and things like that. The deficit, we are about 11th in rank. And you can look it up on that. We have besides China, Mexico, Vietnam, Ireland, Germany, there's so many other countries, South Korea, Japan, all of them have, even Vietnam, they all have a higher deficit than Bharat. In fact, our trade is very little. In fact, we should be doing much better between two large countries and economies, right? Now, the USA, Bharat-Russia relationship. First, let us see what the Russia-US trade is. And you'll be surprised, they do have a trade. So in 2015, they had 23 billion. And remember, 2015 is after the Euromaidan, they had all the coup and they removed the pro-Russian government of Viktor Yanukovych or something.
Yanukovych. Yeah.
Yanukovych, they removed him in a coup. They still call it as a democracy. I mean, they can call whatever as democracy, but eventually they installed Petro Poroshenko or someone, right? Petro Poroshenko. So
Poroshenko. Yeah.
they installed a pro-Western government person over there, and after installing him, there was some sort of a war. The Russia to Crimea and all of that. This business is after that. 2020, it's still the same. Nothing much has changed, right? 2022 is when the Russian invasion started. It reduced a bit, but as of 2024, USA was doing a $3.4 billion business in goods, of which it had $2.4 billion of deficit. The total amount of trade, including the goods and services, comes to about 5.2 billion. This in 2024, right? Now we hear that everybody must stop trading with Russia. But let us look at the 2025 statistics till June, and this is in the census.gov US website, government website. Just in 6 months, USA has already done as much trade as it did in 2024 for the whole year. It already did $2.8 billion worth of trade in goods, and it already has the same amount of deficit. If you think about it, this entire business that's going on with Russia right now of the US, this money, you have to remember what Bharat is. I'm going to go with those numbers too. This business is not even needed. So they're simply doing this business, and this business works on a profit. Which means if somebody is funding Russia in any of those wars, this money goes directly to that war. What is a Russia-Euro trade? In 2024, this is from European, the government website, their report shows 67.5 billion euros is the trade, which is about $80 billion that happened in 2024. So most of it is fuel, about 62% of it is for fuel, which is about 22.3 billion euros. All right. So European Union.
Something doesn't add up here, Mohanji. 22 billion of 67 billion is 1/3.
That is correct. I think I got the number reversed probably.
Yeah.
A third of it is for rest of them. The fuel is the rest of this. Okay. I think I just got the numbers reversed probably. That's a good catch. So I think this is everything else. 62.1% is probably for the fuel and other petrol products, but 62% is for the fuel and petrol products. So which means a substantial amount. European Union did spend a substantial amount of money. In this case, it looks like about 40 billion euros they spent on getting the fuel. It can be all different kinds, not necessarily oil. It can be LNG, natural gas, and so many other things, right? But whatever it is, they spent all of this until 2024. So really, if anybody is funding the Russian war, European Union is certainly funding that directly. And so is America. This money goes directly as profits. Now what Bharat is doing is it had a $10 billion business in 2021. Now it went to $68.7 billion in 2024. This is our, I think it's a consulate website that had this number. Now this 68 billion, you have to remember that in 2024 or so, 22, 23, it is USA that was requesting Bharat to purchase oil from Russia, just so we don't purchase from Saudi and other places, and the price of the oil will just suddenly shoot up. It'll probably go up to like $150 or $200 per barrel, and it's going to put all the markets, off balance. So they were actually encouraging Bharat to go and purchase from Russia, and the clause there says is it is going to be at a price where Russia does not make enough profit to actually have the war, to fund the war. So this entire money, $68 billion, a substantial portion of it is for the fuel, oil that we purchase. But this deal is in such a way, it's constructed in such a way that cannot go for funding the war. But The numbers that you see for the Euro deal and what America was funding actually funds the war, because these have no such clauses. So it is a complete hypocrisy that they pick these, they pick on the 68 billion, which actually does not fund the war as it's part of the deal, but this 2.8 billion does. Now, Trump also said that this may not fund the war, but we take that oil and sell it for profit. So we are making profit out of it. But there are two issues to it. Issue number one is that profit comes to Bharat. It's not going to Russia, right? Because this purchase is already done. If a purchase is already done with a contract that makes sure that that money, they don't make enough money to fund the war, which means Russia isn't getting anything. So if there's any profit, if we are selling for profit, that profit goes to Bharat. And I don't know why Trump should have an issue with it. Number two, of all the exports, the $45 billion that we see the deficit, or $80 billion exports that we did to USA, the Bharat did, in that we send pharmaceuticals, the gems and jewelry, and a substantial portion is petroleum products. So the one is complaining that we're making profit, they are actually purchasing that. So none of this is actually funding Russia. That is a completely bogus claim. It doesn't make any sense at all, because this is already purchased from Russia. If there is any profit that is made, that goes to Bharat. And who is purchasing that? It is again US that is purchasing that. It is one of the things that is purchasing besides pharmaceuticals and jewelry and things like that. All right. So every claim that he made is bogus. If you look at these numbers, you can quote these numbers. They all come from the government website. Now, the last part is about the Russia-India relation. Now, Russia has been a very consistent, reliable partner for decades. Now, USA did threaten to nuke Bharat in 1971, and it did encourage China to go and attack Bharat in 1971, despite the fact that Pakistan was a military dictatorship which sponsors terrorism, a state-sponsored terrorist nation. And it was proactively doing a genocide in Bangladesh. Despite all of these factors, because in 1972 they wanted to have a special deal with China, basically they threatened to nuke Bharat if we don't stop the war. That's the relation they had. They repeated sanctions on Indo-US partnership many times. Like even in 1998, we were trying to build things together like a Tejas aircraft, and they would put sanctions on Bharat. So it has never been consistent, the relationship. But USA did have consistent support to Pakistan all the way till 2025. Now, because we never had any consistent good relation with USA, that never supported us, and they consistently supported our enemy Pakistan through and through, all the way to the point of ready to nuking us in 1971. So Operation Sindoor presented a beautiful opportunity where USA could become a really trustworthy friend. And what I think is Trump literally pulled a defeat from the jaws of victory. If he had just supported Bharat at this point, that would have cemented the entire relationship. And is it the trade? The trade has nothing to do with it. Like we have seen the numbers, that's a very paltry amount. And it will not affect Bharat in any sense. Now, the last point is India. We say he keeps talking about how we are funding Russia and that has to be stopped and things like that. I want Indians to know that Bharat has nothing to do with this regional NATO dispute. And we should tell people that we have nothing to do with that. Now, what is a NATO? NATO is an exclusive white country military coalition. There are 32 nations in it, a dozen of them, 12 nations joined right after the World War II, right? All of them are white nations. And then 4 more joined later. Then they had a pact with Russia. When Russia had a Warsaw Pact, the Western Europe and America had a NATO. In 1991, when USSR broke up, they dismantled Warsaw, and the condition was the NATO is not going to expand further. And everybody was clear about it. But come 1999, a few years later, they added 16 nations. And all of them are white countries. In some sense, NATO is a white supremacist military coalition. There is Bharat or China or any other nation has nothing to do with it. You have to remember that the idea of white has also been evolving over the years. Earlier, the Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, all of them are called Slavs, from which the word slave has come. So even though all of them are white, they have different classes of those whites, and they were not considered equals, right? Not so now. Now things are changing, and they started adding more people. But it has nothing to do with Bharat. Any other nation is not going to get involved in this. And again, North Atlantic, please look at the map, the world map. When you draw the line of North Atlantic, a substantial portion of Africa, substantial portion of South America, and many other nations come in it. So it is not like there were only white nations around it, but NATO has only white nations. And therefore, Bharat should have nothing to do with it. And it should not get involved in this dispute between white countries.
Thank you so much. I haven't seen a more clear enunciation of what this whole thing is all about. It certainly does not appear to be the fact that there is a deficit between India and the United States. It is something else. And P. Guru, we have been saying this for a long time, that Trump doesn't like the fact that Putin is not dancing to his tune, and Putin is marching to his own step, and he has his own plans. And this is really irking the hell out of him. And this is, unfortunately, India is becoming more like a collateral damage. This is a takeaway from here, viewers. And so the problem is not going to get solved by India sitting down and talking tariffs. The problem is going to get solved by Putin and Trump coming to an amicable agreement. From what I'm hearing, Steve Wynkoff had a 3-hour discussion with Putin. No details have emerged yet. But now, Marco Rubio has made a press conference saying that we have better idea of what Russia wants. We're going to go back to Ukraine. We're going to rework their expectations. Something to that nature is what is happening. I think Putin will be happy with 4 states of Ukraine. And by the way, if they had stopped 1 month after the conflict had started, Ukraine would have lost less. That's my takeaway from all these things. Unfortunately, a lot of people have died. A lot of the commerce, the country that Ukraine is, its capacity to be a supplier of many things to the world has been completely decimated. Very, very sad state of affairs now. That's what I have from my side. We have a few questions, Mohanji, and in conclusion, if you would like to conclude, because this is what I'm reading, and I've been saying this consistently also, if you would like to conclude what your perception is about this huge fracas between US and India.
So there can be multiple reasons. One of them is, people in the West are used to Bharat being a meek and a weak country. And that is how their policies have always been. And for the first time, we have someone who is very assertive, and therefore they're not able to digest that yet, and they have to get used to that idea as well, right? So that is one. But the biggest threat that we have is not from US or anyone. The biggest threat that we have on who the West can enable, because if you really want to get into the big league, then you have to pass certain tests, right? And they're not going to put a red carpet. So I think the biggest threat is going to be a domestic one. We have a lot of traitors within Bharat. For example, I'm very unhappy with what Rahul Gandhi goes around the world and ranting things against Bharat. I think we have a lot of traitors within Bharat. We should be careful.
Next one, please. Let's take some questions now, Mohanji. Questions, please. Milban Cherian wants to know, is the CCP controlled by the cabal?
You mean like the deep state here? No, I don't think so. CCP is a very powerful state. If anything, it's going to be the other way around. See, deep state, every country has certain degree of deep state. I think CCP most likely already found a seat at the big table. So I don't think deep state is controlling them. Rather, they are also part of it. So in fact, most of the people that you see, like George Soros and others, they all are leftists. So if anything, it could be the other way around. But more certainly, CCP found a chair at the table, a nice seat, but it could also be controlling it. CCP could be controlling the deep state.
Jack Simplifies wants to know, WTO has proved to be toothless, US unreliable, and now trust is broken. Has US shot itself in the foot, hastening its decline? What should India's strategy, short and long term? Cozy up to China?
Okay, so the first thing is, yes, what USA is doing right now is bad. I would say the Indo-US partnership at this point, we're at a state where it is more beneficial for USA than it is for Bharat. So it is in the best interest of USA to come to the table and make a friendship with Bharat, because we are pretty much the only friend left. And we were the very favorable, and people have very favorable opinion. And for some reason, he is ruining that. Second is, should we cozy up to China? No, we don't have to. See, the issue with many of the Bharatiya is that we somehow think we are, like I said, we are some weaklings. So somehow we have to be in somebody's camp. We are the camp. We are a large nation. See, for 70 years, we have been a nation of lions that is led by a sheep, a Congress sheep. And so we are made to believe that somehow we are weaklings. And no matter what anyone does, and many of the Desis actually get terrified and scared that, oh, USA did this, Pakistan or Bangladesh or China, they're scared of everything. For the first time, we have a government, it's a lions led by a group of lions led by a lion. People have to change their attitude. We are going to stand on our own. We are not cozying up with China or with Russia or with USA. If you think about it, there are four major powers in the world: USA, China, Russia, and Bharat. So we don't have to be on anybody's camp. We are our own camp.
Next one, please. Wilburn again, did not most of the money get into the pockets of the globalist cabal, who are the European oligarchy and monarchies, along with the Anglo-Dutch cabal?
Yes. So most of these wars and any of these things, it's always the rich, and some governments get rich, and obviously some oligarchs are going to get rich. If you think about it, we can go over some basic numbers. Like the Ukraine war, America has given about anywhere between 150 to 200 billion dollars for the war, right? The the defense budget for Russia is about 60 to 70 billion dollars, which includes all giving the pays and taking care of many other things. And so the actual procurement is going to be for about $20 billion. What if I told you that a country A has $20 billion for the procurement and a country B has $200 billion? Who is going to win? Naturally, the one with 200 billion. But Ukraine got 200 billion worth of equipment. That is the entire procurement. A teeny fraction of it went for any other purpose. Everything is equipment. Whereas Russia is spending about 20-30 billion. During wartime, it could be a little higher, but that's about all that it's spending, right? So how come Ukraine kept losing the whole territory and it's not doing a good job? I'm saying, even though we cannot prove it anywhere, but obviously the 200 billion is going into somebody's pocket, right? It's not really going for the war. If somebody spent 200 billion on one side to purchase an equipment and go to war, the other side has 20 billion budget for procurement. I think there is a lot of corruption that is happening. Zelensky, I think, is completely a gone case. He is probably the only fool in the world over centuries who has taken an entire country to destruction. Nobody goes to war. It has never happened in the history of humanity, except by the fools, that you would go to a war based on somebody else's strength. He's the first person to do it. I think there's a lot of fraud in it.
Next one, please. Mohan says, Brazil wants urgent BRICS meeting about US tariff sanctions. Can internal measures by BRICS to counter US tariff sanctions by a more useful alternative to BRICS currency, which we don't want?
Yes, can internal measures by BRICS to counter US tariffs. Okay.
What he's trying to say is BRICS, let's say BRICS says that we will counter dollar with X. India is not willing to take that X. So what is exactly... Yeah.
No, we're not going to take that X, and we should not either, because right now China is trying to push its currency to be the global currency. So
it's worthless piece of shit, guys.
We're not going to do that. Yeah. Secondly, in the BRICS, Brazil, I don't think has a deficit. I don't know the sanctions part because the tariffs, because I think Brazil is actually in surplus, if I remember. But I have to go and check that number. Rest of them have deficits. I know that even Russia has it, as we see it for the imports. Bharat has it, China has it. But Brazil, as I recollect, probably is in surplus. I'm not sure. But definitely BRICS is not going to work on a separate currency. In fact, what we are trying to do is break this kind of a currency hegemony. The whole idea of what Bharat is trying to say is, we will go back to each country having trade and we'll strengthen everybody's currency, which means most likely we'll go back to the gold standard.
Yeah. Yeah. Next one, please. Pizza Lot wants to know, why did you not consider FDI and remittances to India, 32 billion and 15 billion? No, FDI remittances sounds a little okay. Your thoughts?
Yeah. So see, remittances, I think is going to tax them about 4 or 5%. So I don't think it's going to give. There's going to be like a tariff level 35, 40, or 50%. That's not how it's going to work. So these are going to function very differently. This is post earning, right? It's not like the business trade. So that is a
And
whole
this is
different.
investments into the future. We have to, the net total of a country's output is not just remittances.
And
Remittances
actually, go to the
is one
Congress.gov
aspect.
site.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Congress.gov or the site that I had given in the beginning, that also has this FDI numbers for each of the countries. But I
And
think
again, this is each year it's coming with small numbers.
correct.
I really don't think this moves the needle. Sorry, Pizzala. That's
It
why this
doesn't
whole thing
actually, yeah,
was, yeah.
yeah.
Ankit wants to know, what are the thoughts on Americans not saving but investing their money in the market?
It is the same thing. What do you think is happening with the market? See, I tell people that most of the times when somebody says there is a big news and the market fluctuates, if you look at the graph over a long period of time, it is going through in a certain pattern. It always does. But I think every time there is a sensational news, the market goes up and down. I think there are dedicated people who scoop money out of it.
Yeah.
So other than that, rest of them are losing the money, right? So I know a lot of people invest unless it's a long-term investment. If somebody is doing for this kind of fluctuations, I know people say the government changed, therefore there's a fluctuation. No, you can look at the graph over a period of time. Just because the government changes, the graph also smoothens out. If it has to go down because of bad policies, it goes down gradually or it goes up gradually. What happens on election night is somebody sitting there and making money out of it. And so is the case with all the sensational news that you ever hear, right? But in general, their culture don't save. They don't save anything. Investing in market and all of that is, like I said, all of these things benefit the corporates in some form or the other. If you look at it, right?
Nitin Mittal wants to know, thank you, Nitin. Thanks for this wonderful full session. Is this going to impact India economically, or this can be a blessing in disguise?
I personally think it's not going to affect us at all. In fact, the only problem that we're going to have is if very few sectors, if you think about it, our entire exports, they fall under a very few categories, right? One is pharmaceuticals, which is an essential thing for US. So all the generic drugs, a substantial portion of generic drugs actually come from Bharat. All right. And I don't think, I mean, just putting any tariffs on that, these are big businesses, these are pharma companies, and I don't think it's going to work the same way. I mean, they're not going to get as much affected. All right. Even the brand names in USA, the raw chemicals for that and initial chemicals for that all come from Bharat. So besides that, we do the jewelries and gems and gold and things like that. And then we do some textiles. All of these are little mini segments. If there is an issue, maybe they might make some noise. I think it is still not that sector that will make a noise. Bharat is a diverse country, and I believe there are a lot of enemies within the country, and somebody can take an advantage and create an issue. Other than that, this is a very small amount, and I think we can easily absorb that and redistribute to other countries. In fact, it will have absolutely no impact. Our trade with USA was very low. If you look at historically, it's very low. We're almost not dependent on them. And it's almost like what Trump did is he's trying to squash even the basic bud. We just started growing. It's like a little plant. And for some reason, I don't understand why this should be blooming well between the largest democracy and the oldest democracy. And he squashed it. Other than that, it does not affect us in any way.
Next one. Prem Joy wants to know, Prem J. Only 4 major powers in the world, according to this guy, and India is part of that. So why is India not part of the UN P5?
So UNP5 is
Security Council?
basically old man's
No.
club, and today UN is, for all practical purposes, a toothless organization. Tell me something that UN does, and everybody listens to it. And Bharat has said it over and over again that has become a useless organization at this point, right? So we can be a permanent member, but By the
Why
time
waste
you
time?
remember
It's
it,
losing its relevance. Why waste time trying to become a part of something
exactly.
that's losing relevance? Yeah.
In fact, the NATO, the BRICS, many of them have they wield more power than what United Nations can wield. There are so many other ways of the G7. There's so many other combinations which are more powerful. United Nations is just a dummy organization at this point.
Next question, please. Last question. Thank you, Nitin. US stock market is still pretty high. What are the reasons?
See, U.S. Stock market is high, as in people always invest in a company that they think is stable, right? For example, if you have a landlord, you are more confident that the landlord is going to return your money, which means you're going to invest more. If he asks for some money, you're going to give it. Likewise, U.S. So far has shown that it has a fantastic credit rating. Therefore, everybody is going to invest in U.S. So U.S. can keep on borrowing, but that has a limit. Now, the biggest concern in the Senate and the House is that if USA defaults, the reason why Trump is saying this, even Elizabeth Warren is saying this, that we should probably remove the debt limit, is because the day US defaults, its credit rating is going to crash. And when that happens, things can spiral out of control very fast, because then you lost your capacity to borrow, right? So for now, things are looking pretty. They always look pretty until the last day. Always do.
One thought I want to leave with all our viewers. This is one more observation. Next one, please. Nirav, thank you so much. Democracy is fraud created by Britishers. I'll leave
that. Democracy is sometimes is a race to the bottom, because the opposition has no clear benefit in actually agreeing to anything that the ruling government is doing. In fact, it's almost like having an in-house person who is always trying to pull someone down. So yes, democracy is a race to the bottom in some sense. It's a flawed system, but so far that is better than having a dictatorship, right?
For those who keep saying that US is going to, the de-dollarization has already begun or it's going to go away, just remember this one thing: the United States has never withdrawn its currency. It has never had a demonetization till now. At least till from the Bretton Woods Agreement, it has never done it. It has never tried to say, okay, $100 bill is being counterfeited a lot, therefore I will lower it to $50 bills. Pound has done it, Euro has done it, so and India has done it. So there is a reason why United States dollar is considered a reference. It is something called, it's like safety. People, you go to Cambodia, you can trade with US dollar or with the Cambodian dollar or Cambodian, I don't remember the name of the currency. It's interchangeable. Same in Mexico. I've seen many countries where I can just have dollar bills and I can just get by. I don't need to worry about converting it and using the local currency. So thank you so much, Mohan Garu. This is something like mind-blowing. I think we are trying to tell some of these, Beltway experts, look, you've got something wrong here. I don't know why you are going after India, but it's definitely not for the reasons you are quoting. So at least be truthful about that. So thank you so much. And viewers, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Do share this video with all your friends and relatives. This is not something that's trivial. He has put many, many days of effort in trying to come up with this research. And I hope you find it useful. And again, thank you once again, Mohan Garu. And we'll be back with such incisive research in the near future. Namaskar.
Namaste.